François Villeroy de Galhau, thank you so much for joining us, Governor Banque de France, but also ECB Governing Council member. We do appreciate your time here at the IMF World Bank Annual Meeting.
Thank you for your invitation.
Well, some investors think they may be underestimating the potential for further ECB rate cuts from here. What's the scenario where you see the ECB continuing its easing?
Let me give the global picture on the ECB. We are in a good position, as Christine Lagarde stressed. We are 2 and 2, more or less 2% inflation, which is our target, and 2% interest rates. But a good position is not a fixed position, and we must follow what I call agile pragmatism. Pragmatism, we look at data, including the outlook, and if I look at the outlook, I think the risks on inflation are more tilted to the downside for several reasons. There is some increase of Chinese imports, quite significant, plus 10% in the last 4 months compared with last year, which is disinflationary, and this is trade diversion after the protectionist measures in the US. There is the exchange rate, and there are other technical factors. And on the upside, there are little risk, especially after the trade agreement with the US, because the EU did not retaliate. So it means that if, I stress the if, Karen, if, as we are in a good position, we'll see. But if there is a next move, I think a rate cut is more likely than a rate hike.
There was always a concern that China could seek to bolster its market share in other parts of the world to compensate for the United States. In this scenario where you notice more imports coming in, are there countervailing measures that should be taken at the European Commission level?
This does not belong to us as ECB. It belongs to the Commission on Trade Measures. There were measures 2 years ago about electric vehicles. There have been measures some days ago about steel. So again, it's in the Commission's hand. I don't see with pleasure protectionism developing worldwide, starting in the US, unfortunately, because this is bad news for global growth everywhere, including and first and foremost for the American economy. But in this world, the EU has to take adequate measures.
What's your view on the timing around the tariff impact? Because it's been very slow to translate, and if you've noticed some of the product diversion taking place now, is there still more to come?
I guess most economists, including the IMF, where we speak from, agree that the negative effects on growth and the increasing effects on inflation are deferred. They did not disappear, and there are various reasons why it came later than expected. Probably one of the most important reasons is that there was some front-loading on imports in Q1 before the tariffs. But it remains bad news. Let me stress that in other parts of the world, and take Europe, we have the negative effect on growth. We don't have the increasing effect on inflation due, as I said, to the fact that we didn't retaliate.
There has been a view that we may have gone peak tariffs now, but then of course the US and China remain at loggerheads, so the story has circled back in a way. Is just the uncertainty enough around two major trading pairs enough to create more negative headwinds for the global economy?
No, uncertainty is for sure the first enemy of confidence and growth and innovation. And what we see at present is more than uncertainty, it's unpredictability in some major directions. So everything which can reduce this uncertainty globally or in each country is very welcome, I
want to ask you about...
To say it with other words, Karen, the global economy is resilient, but it's suboptimal. It's resilient in the US as it is in the euro area. We increase our growth forecast in France and for the euro area this year. So this is a good surprise, but it remains suboptimal due to these protectionist measures and this unpredictability.
When it comes to inflation, you mentioned the 2% level, but there's still sticky parts in the inflation basket, namely around services, 3.2% recently. Is that just a hangover from the post-COVID era? Will it naturally correct, or do you still see a stubborn challenge there?
No, when I look at services inflation, traditionally it's a bit higher than the inflation on goods because it benefits less of productivity gains and global trade. But services inflation is decreasing significantly, and wage moderation, which is a key driver of services inflation, wage moderation is there. Let me stress, especially in my country, France, where we have a lower service inflation and a remarkable wage moderation.
Well, you mentioned France. The political situation seems to be detracting from growth. How would you summarize what you are seeing and the economic consequences for the ECB?
First, I am only a central banker and an independent central banker, so it's not up to me to comment the political situation. But let me say briefly that the political uncertainty receded yesterday, which is rather good news. After reducing political uncertainty, we now have to reduce fiscal uncertainty. And it's important to understand about what the discussion is in France at present. It's not about Europe nor the euro. The political support for the euro is at record high, 79% of French citizens across the political age. It's not a question of recession because, as I said, the French economy is rather resilient. It's a question of how to reduce fiscal deficit. Here I am extremely clear. We have to reduce our fiscal deficit to 3% in 29. We had the first step this year from 5.8% to 5.4%. It's encouraging, but we must go further with a significant step next year with the 26 budget. But again, it's a discussion a bit about the pace, more about the how and the political mix. This is not up to the central bank to decide, but it's our national interest to reduce this fiscal uncertainty. May I still add one word on the economy? Traditionally, when there is fiscal tightening, people fear the negative Keynesian effect on growth. In our case, it's more than compensated probably by the reduction of the uncertainty. The savings rate of households in France is very high. So if we can reduce uncertainty, bring more confidence, to give you an example, if we reduce the savings rate by 1%, we would increase GDP by 0.4%. So it's a very powerful lever.
When we take a big picture view of the situation in France, are you concerned if France does not get its house in order, pass a budget, that we could see contagion risk for the rest of Europe?
I don't think so. I don't think so. It's more a French problem, let me be honest, that it's our national interest, as I said, to reduce the cost of day we pay each year, because our room of maneuver is decreasing year after year, and we have less to invest in the real priorities, be it defense, education, climate change, etc. But the euro area is very solid at present, and you saw, by the way, a general move of convergence of spreads within the euro area, very strong one in the last year.
The transmission protection instrument, some in the marketplace believe it would not be appropriate to bail out France if the bond vigilantes swooped on French paper. What do you think? Would it be used?
Let me be extremely clear about this. The question is not on the table at present. Again, it's a French debate about French fiscal policy.
Let me push on then and ask you about growth for France for 2026 and 2027. How do you see it playing out? How do you see growth playing out in France for 2026, 2027? What's on the way?
Our forecast is 0.9% next year and 1.1% in 27, so around 1%, which is more or less potential growth. But this is not sufficient. But let me stress that this is not a specific French challenge. It's a European challenge. We have a too low potential growth, and we have the ways and means to increase it. Call it the Draghi report and the Letta report. We have the roadmap. Now we must implement it. The Commission started to integrate more the single market, to invest better through the savings union, to innovate faster through simplification. There are elements positive on the table, but we must have a more comprehensive package. We must have a mobilizing deadline. Why not the 1st of January 28, for example? Europe has the ways and means to increase its own growth. If I link it with the US situation, there is a major shift by the new US administration. If it has one positive effect, it's to be a powerful wake-up call for Europe.
There's no doubt there are reforms happening at a European-wide level, but if you look at every individual country, there are still structural reforms to take place, and that is in Germany, it's in Italy, it's in Spain, but it's also in France. What structural reforms do you think need to happen quickly at a national level in France?
No, they are more or less the same everywhere. If I take an example in France, reforms were extremely efficient on the labor market. People are not aware of that, but job creations in France has been the best one in the G7 in the last 5 years, since COVID. And it's not by chance. If I look at Germany, the new German government is deeply aware that it has to accelerate structural reforms and, by the way, use its fiscal room of maneuver. There is no such one in France or Italy, but there is one in Germany. So if I look at individual countries, I would also wish all of them to accelerate, but there are positive signs.
I want to ask you about the euro. There's been a big debasement trade unfolding on markets. Gold has been favoured, cryptocurrencies as well, as we see a move away from the US dollar. What is the role of the euro in this moment as a reserve currency? Is there more Europe can do to promote the reserve status of the euro?
Can I first say that I always react to the word cryptocurrencies, and we speak of crypto assets because there are no such thing as a currency. But on the international role of the euro, there is a window of opportunity. It will be a very gradual diversification of the international monetary system, and the dollar will remain central. But there are expectations from international investors of growing diversification, and there is on our side a growing awareness that we have to develop that. Can I stress two levers? First, what I said about savings union and a deeper internal financial market with less borders, domestic borders within Europe. This would attract more investors. So everything for the saving and investment union, domestic purpose, increases the international appeal of the euro. The other lever is the question of safe asset. There is not such thing as a European euro-denominated safe asset, but to take one example among many possibilities, a common defense budget, as proposed by my German colleague Joachim Nagel, would be a powerful booster for EU-denominated debt, which could be the ground or pave the ground for European safe asset. We had such a program after COVID called NGAU. Defense could be an opportunity to foster and increase it.
As we count down to the end of the year, it has been an enormous year for Europe in terms of soul searching on its competitiveness. We've seen huge packages unfurled from infrastructure to defence. What is the challenge going into 2026 to capture the full rewards of what has been promised to investors?
I think you don't achieve everything in 1 year. But you are right, 25 has been the wake-up year, as I said, or an obvious year of growing awareness around the European table. So there are many proposals of the Commission. Again, I would wish to have a more comprehensive package with a mobilizing deadline 1st of January 28. We are lucky enough to have a Commission and a European Parliament which have a 5 years term. So we have space. On our side, in the ECB, I think we are in a good position, and we have record high support for the euro, but we must accelerate within our remit on the international role of the euro and on central bank digital currency, answering the tokenization of money. We have the right strategy, but we should implement it still quicker.
Is there enough innovation happening in Europe when it comes to stable coins? I mean, stable coins are sweeping the world of finance. It's an innovative strategy. Is Europe doing enough to prepare for the future?
On the public side, Europe is leading with the CBDC, and in other countries like the US, CBDC has been forbidden, which is a bit difficult to understand. And to give you one example, in what we call wholesale CBDC, Europe will elaborate the first unified ledger where you will exchange in some years tokenized central bank money, tokenized deposits of commercial banks, and tokenized assets, so-called APIA project. Not very well known, but really disruptive, and here Europe leads. On the private side, the focus at present is more in the US for an obvious reason, because most stable coins are issued in dollars. Due to the present use cases, crypto exchanges, cross-border. But in the future, and we start to see initiative by European banks, we could have tokenized money in euros, be it tokenized deposits or stable coins. Time will tell.
Just finally, I want to ask you about crisis planning. There's been a big discussion raging around the use of QE and the instruments that were deployed during the last financial crisis. The Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, taking an attack on the use of that, saying it was an overreach by some central banks. And if you look at the amount of borrowing just recently too, in the latest around the pandemic for France, the borrowing now sitting on 3.4 trillion euros worth of debt, thanks to the borrowing in the pandemic. Is there an element now that as we prepare for the next crisis, that some of the tools on unfurling large spending and using QE should not be used in future?
I don't think so. I won't comment on the US debate, which apparently is much more political than technical or economic. But in the European case, we concluded our last strategy review this summer. And we said clearly that we would keep these instruments. We will see in the future how to use them. But remember where we were in 2020 with COVID. We were at extremely low inflation with a risk of deflation, and we were at the effective lower bound. So when you have a risk of deflation and you no longer have the usual instrument of interest rates, fortunately, you have QE. I don't say that it belongs to the conventional monetary policy, but it belongs, and it should still belong, to our toolbox with more agility, more readability or communication on that. But I think it has been very useful.
François Villeroy de Galhau, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining us on CNBC.